nobody pushed back on the fundamental terms. Like, wait a second. You know, is there evidence for this? Do you know this to be true? Don't Americans have an inherent, which is to say a right they were born with, an inherent right to make their own decisions about how they live on the most basic level, what medicine they put in their body, where they travel? Nobody said that. And of course, the media never presented that as an option. You saw this in the war in Ukraine. It began, and the first thing you knew, I mean, you could have like divergent opinions, I guess, about which weapon systems to send, but you were told at the very beginning that, you know, Russia was our enemy. One thing we know about this is that one side is bad and one side is virtuous. And, you know, I think a lot of decent people would reach that conclusion independently. I'm not contesting that. I think it's completely fair to think Russia's bad and Ukraine's good. But it's also within bounds to not agree with that. Because if you're an American, you have the right to decide who you hate, okay? That is a fundamental right. No one is allowed to force you to be mad at somebody else. If you're an adult, you get to decide. And you get to decide on the basis of whatever criteria you want. And it's totally fair to say, well, I don't know. I'm not mad at that person. You're not a criminal for thinking that. It's not a criminal act not to hate somebody. So it's totally fair to say, well, wait a second. You know, it's not an expression of love for Russia to say they haven't killed any Americans. Why is that crazy? That's true. I said to one of the candidates yesterday, I mean, look, I've never been to Russia. I'm not that interested in ever going. I don't speak Russian. I'm born in this country, kind of probably plan to die here. Hope to. But let's just do the body count. So what's the total number of Americans murdered by Russia in the last 3 years? I'm thinking, I'm not great at math. I think it's around 0, in that range. I don't know any. I do know 2 people well personally who've died from fentanyl that was manufactured in Mexico and allowed by the Mexican government to come here. Now, I'm not against Mexico. I grew up right next to it. I kind of like Mexico, actually. But the Mexican government allows that. And over 100,000 Americans die every year from that poison. Not because they were drug addicts who took too much, but because they were poisoned. Because they were taking a pill they thought was something else, and it turned out to be fentanyl, manufactured in Mexico and allowed by the Mexican government to come here. And so that's 100,000 a year. That's hundreds of thousands of Americans dead, mostly young people. Well, or sure, or more. Or more. So if you had a country that allowed hundreds of thousands of your fellow citizens to die at, say, age 23, and I'm sure every person in this room knows someone or knows someone who knows someone who's died. It's not some abstract epidemic. It's so big that everybody knows somebody. It was like the height of the pandemic. An outlaw I know, possibly my wife, said to somebody, how many people do you know who've died of COVID? And I was like, well, you know, a lot. Well, who are they? Well, like a friend of mine's, her grandparents died. What was her name? I don't know, his grandparent. How old was she? Well, you know, late 80s. Okay. How many people do you know who've been injured by the vaccine? Well, a ton. So, I don't know, at a certain point, you can draw conclusions from that. A scientific assessment? No, but it's not irrelevant. So on the question of Russia, if you begin the conversation with, this is an evil country that has hurt America and we have to go to war with them, well, then there's kind of no debate about it, is there? I mean, no one would defend Nazi Germany. They killed many tens of thousands of Americans. You can't defend them. No decent person would defend that. But in the case of modern Russia, you're not even allowed to think that. And once you're prevented from thinking something, you are completely controlled by the person who's convinced you of that. And the effects of this to me, just as an observer, I mean, in my life, I just try to stay unaffected by the propaganda. That's like the main goal of my life every morning. Just to stay unaffected, just to look around and try to assess things cold. What are we looking at here?